The reason I really love checking back in with a phone after a month or 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year is because it often surprises me how many little things that did bother me in maybe the first week, the first 2 weeks, they don't bother me as much anymore, or maybe even at all after a month or two has gone by. And in the spirit of that, we're going to be talking about the Galaxy Z Fold 6 here, which that screen is very bright and very blown out. The Galaxy Z Fold 6, because that has ended up being true for me to a fairly large degree as I'm daily driving this device. Again, I'm finding myself enjoying it more now than I did in that initial review period, and we're going to talk about that in today's video. The first thing I want to say will address the elephant in the room. I am still not a huge fan of the narrow cover display, but where we are now with the Z Fold 6, I think is close enough that if I give it a fair shake and I use it for more than, 5, 6, 7 days at a time, I start to forget that it is more narrow than I would actually prefer it to be, and it really starts to become much more of a non-issue. I would love nothing more for this screen to be a little bit shorter. It can keep that narrow width. If it was a little bit shorter and the aspect ratio was a little bit more squared off because of that, and it was a bit easier to reach with one hand without having to use a one-handed mode, reach the top of the screen, I would definitely prefer that. But like I said, use it for a little while, and it really does start to diminish in terms of how big of an issue it actually is. And then that internal screen, it's fine, right? Like, it definitely is wide enough to get quite a bit done. When I am going to do multitasking, I do have a tendency to want to rotate it so that those two individual windows are a little bit larger, but it's generally fine. Now, my feelings on the camera of the Z Fold 6 might have actually gone in the other direction, and I'll show you quickly what I posted on Threads here just a little while ago. This is Jet, the newest member of the Craig household, and as you can see here, she is very much out of focus, and she's a puppy, okay? She moves around a decent amount, but she wasn't moving that much, but unfortunately, the lighting wasn't perfect, and because of that, any little movement when you're taking photos with these Samsung cameras, you end up getting something that looks like this, or looks like this here. Her face is just completely blurred out. Switch over to Google Photos so I can really zoom in. You can see how there's no detail on her face at all. You can see individual fur strands on her chest, but here, no detail at all. And if we scroll down, I'll show you a couple of photos that the OnePlus Open took that are tack sharp. And trust me, she's moving just as much in these photos as she was for the Samsung camera. The difference is, it just does a much better job with movement, and that's a real problem, and it really does start to irritate me. And the end result is, with this camera, unless I'm out, in really good lighting and things are very stationary, I end up just taking far fewer photos than I normally would. Samsung really has got to do something with these cameras, in particular with motion and low light. But guys, those are kind of my only real negatives about this phone, and it turns out that everything else is pretty darn good. I think you can make a really strong argument that otherwise, the Z Fold 6 is the most feature-complete foldable around. There are very few instances where I'm using this device where I think to myself, man, feature whatever is missing, and I really wish I had it right now. Everything is pretty much here, right? Like, you've got access to Circle to Search, which I actually do use a relatively large amount. You have access to AI-generated wallpapers, which is what this is right here, and I really like having that. But then you also have access to other stuff. Like, look, it's not quite as good as what Google has with their call screening, but Bixby does have a similar sort of thing, and it works well enough for me. It's not as good, but it's going to get me by. But, you have things like DeX as well, things that nobody else is really offering on a foldable. OnePlus doesn't have that. The Pixel Fold doesn't have that. The Z Fold 6 does. You have an incredibly feature-rich multitasking experience that has every option that you could just about imagine. I am a big fan of Open Canvas, but short of something like that, Samsung has absolutely knocked this out of the park. You can have two applications open side by side. You can take it a step further and actually have a third application open right there as well. And on top of all of that, a floating window is also an option. And it's a floating window that works in any application you want to try. Let's just full screen YouTube and we will drag this down, and there we go. We have a floating window. Making sure I didn't just dox my personal email address in the background. You have a floating window that can be resized to just about any size that you want. And again, it works with any app. Of course, you have access to the S Pen, and yes, the OnePlus Open does technically have the ability to use the Oppo Pen, but good luck buying it for anything less than like $200 US. The availability is really bad. You can get this thing in a case for like, what, $70 or something like that. I think that's what I paid for the case that came with the pen, and there are loads of really useful features. I would say that they probably have a better feature set for the S Pen than you have with the Oppo Pen. They've been building out the feature set for this for years, so that should obviously be the case. You maybe have seen news stories about how the Pixel 9 has the ability to do crazy things within Magic Editor, and it can generate just crazy stuff that looks very realistic. Well, guys, guess what? Using Sketch to Image, presumably with your S Pen, you can do very similar things on your Z Fold 6. That feature is basically here. The only real difference is that you can't just write down what you want it to generate. You actually have to take the time to sketch it, and it has to then recognize what you probably very crudely, if you're me, very crudely, tried to sketch out, and then it will use the generative AI to try and generate something that looks like what you drew. For some reason, it decided that the snake I drew should be completely white, but you can see what I mean. You can do all sorts of things with Sketch to Image. Whether you're talking about built-in settings, experimental labs settings, or you're talking about GoodLock and all of the many modules that you can use within GoodLock, there just isn't another foldable on the market that has the level of customization that is available to you with the Galaxy Z Fold 6. So again, I say that it's, my opinion, this is, in terms of software features, the most feature-complete device available. In some ways, you can almost criticize them for packing in as much as they do. There's almost too much. There's so many things you're probably never even going to discover. You're never going to use them. Maybe they're not going to be useful to you, but they are there if you want them. For me, a great example of that is something that's available inside my launcher settings. You can see at the top, cover screen mirroring. I'm weird. I actually have this turned on, but by default, it is turned off. And what this means is you're going to be able to have an entirely different layout on your internal screen versus what you have on your external screen. You can see that I have two individual pages here, but when I open the thing, I have a single page that looks different, and my launcher with the app drawer here looks different. You can jump into your settings of your launcher, you can turn on cover screen mirroring, and now those two pages I just showed you on my cover display are here on my internal display, represented as two sort of side-by-side pages. You can see in my app drawer, there's that split down the middle that kind of signifies that you're seeing two separate pages. I actually like it this way, but if you don't, you can change it. Nobody offers more flexibility than Samsung. Now, I will openly tell you, I'm not the biggest fan of One UI. It just feels a little bit sterilized to me. It's a little bit lacking in the fun aspect. And like some other Chinese OEMs, I do feel like they're leaning into the copy iPhone thing a little bit too much in a few places. Don't get me wrong, it's good and it looks fine. But I am a big fan of the Pixel version of Android because it does have this colorful, bouncy, fun, like homey vibe that I really do enjoy. So those pixels do kind of draw me back in, but I will also openly tell you that this phone has grown on me a lot over the last couple of weeks, over this last month, as I have like really sort of honed what my home screen experience is going to be like, and I have allowed myself to get used to that more narrow cover display. And I've also been using the Aramid fiber case by Thinborn on the back the last couple of days. I've left off the front piece because they just, no front case on folding phones seem to fit right for me. They always get kind of flimsy over here. So I just took it off. And because of that, it feels really good in the hand. It's kind of grippy on the back. And I just like the way that the device looks and feels now that I've really kind of gotten everything dialed in. And I find myself really enjoying using this phone much more than I think I expected to. And I mean, look at the front of this thing. It looks great. If you just saw this, you would potentially think this was just a normal phone now, because that hinge area off to the side is no longer nearly as thick. It doesn't stick out quite as far as some of the other competitors. The bezels are fairly uniform and even. It's got that square S24 Ultra look to it. I just think it's a great looking phone, and in terms of foldables, it has got to be on this short list in terms of your best options available. So guys, those are my thoughts about the Galaxy Z Fold 6 about a month later. I do wish that camera was a little bit better. I have found that the battery life is absolutely fine. I'm sitting at 79% right now with basically 2 hours of screen on time, and I've been out of the house on cell a little bit as well. So battery life has been fine. Charging also could definitely be bumped up a little bit, but by and large, the device has grown on me a lot more than I was expecting it to. I do want to hear from you, fine folk in the comments down below who bought the Z Fold 6. How are you feeling a month later? Let me know in those comments down below. I'll see you on the next one. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.